The tax benefits for higher education are supplemental to the scholarships and grant programs we also have at the federal level.
One big reason for it was to be able to give relief and support to middle-income taxpayers. Pell Grants were much more focused on people at the lower end of the income stream.
If you're taking a bigger picture view of how do you fund a student's education, traditionally it had been a focus on the federal student aid system, which is great. But early on, there were opportunities to say, are there ways that we can help alleviate some college cost stress for families, in particular middle-class families who were starting to feel the squeeze of college cost?
We now have a whole array of tax benefits, right? We have the tax credits, we have the deductions, we have so-called 529 plans where you can deposit money into an account which each state creates. It goes through without taxes, it accumulates tax-free, it can be withdrawn to pay college expenses. It's an enormous tax-based saving incentive for college education.
Usually these policies start out conceptually very simple. And then from there, they get increasingly more complicated because some policymaker either wants to limit who gets them and or limit how much they cost. The trend is they're becoming larger, more generous, and more people are becoming eligible both on the low income side and on the higher income side.
A tuition tax credit is a reduction in the taxes you owe, often dollar for the amount that you spent on tuition.
So even back into the 60s, we were debating tax credits versus grant aid.
The policy of the Democratic Party had been for a long time to oppose tuition tax credits, beginning particularly with Lyndon Johnson in 1965 when he proposed the Higher Education Act. By the end of the 70s, tuition tax credits had once again reared their head, and most Democrats were opposing it. Some Democrats, such as Senator Moynihan, Senator Ribicoff, from more affluent middle-income states, were supporting it. The Middle-Income Student Assistance Act, which expanded Pell Grants and expanded eligibility for federal student loans, was designed to be an answer to the push for tuition tax credits.
During the late 1980s and 1990s, there was a dramatic increase in the cost of higher education throughout the country. States began passing incentives on their own at the state level, dealing with their state tax code to reduce the cost of college or encourage people to save for college. Many of them developed plans so that their constituents could lock in tuition at today's rates when their children were young, and then when they went to college, they were not at risk for those college costs having increased in the interim period. And dozens of states set up these plans. Others were just savings plans, kind of like a 401k plan.
And to encourage more families to take advantage of these, they wanted to provide tax incentives for families to participate in them.
The reason tuition tax credits came to the fore, though, were a combination of things came together after the 1994 elections. First, the president, when he ran for office, in his election manifesto, which was called Putting People First, he promised he would seek a middle-class tax cut.
So in '96, a group of these states got together and approached Congress to provide federal tax benefits. So 529 plans really started to evolve. They went from just a few small prepaid plans in a few states to gradually existing in all states as both prepaid and college savings plans.
In 1996, there was a debate about balancing the federal budget between a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. And Republican Congress was adamant that tax cuts be part of any balanced budget agreement.
And the question was that tax cut going to higher income people and corporations and entities, and for capital gains cuts, or would some significant portion of it be aimed at the middle class, targeted at making higher education more affordable for them?
The higher education community and a lot of Democrats in Congress were upset because they felt as though the best way to really increase college access and success was by investing in the Pell Grant program. From the administration's perspective, there was going to be a certain amount of money in for tax cuts, and it made sense to help families, whether they're middle class and planning on sending their kids to college anyway, to help them pay for the rising cost of college.
There were lots of differences to be ironed out between then President Clinton and the Republican Congress in 1997.
Some members of Congress wanted the tax credit to be limited to the first 2 years. However, some members of Congress thought the priority ought to be focused on all 4 years of an undergraduate education. In the end, they reached a compromise.
As part of the Tax Relief Act of 1997, the two key new tuition tax credits were the HOPE tax credit and the Lifetime Learning tax credit. The HOPE credit is a 2-year tax credit, and the Lifetime Learning credit piggybacks onto that 2-year credit with the ability to have a tax benefit for the 3rd and 4th year and graduate and lifetime benefits.
During the discussions between President Clinton and the congressional Republicans, a number of issues came up. One of those was whether the tax credit should be available to individuals who don't pay income tax.
Generally, low-income families don't owe any federal taxes. So you can't get a credit for federal taxes if you don't owe any taxes. So that essentially for them makes the tax credit moot. And the way that policymakers then address that is something called a refundable tax credit. Essentially what it means is even if you don't owe any federal taxes, when you file your taxes, you still get a refund.
So refundable tax credits actually have a spending component where we send checks out to people. They also raise the budget cost considerably because you get a big spending component when you refund the tax credit.
The Treasury, in general, across administrations, tends to resist refundable tax credits because of difficulties of enforcement and monitoring.
Congressional Democrats and President Clinton argued that all Americans pay taxes. It's just a matter of what kind of taxes you pay. All Americans who are working pay payroll taxes into the Social Security Administration. And in fact, for most low-income Americans, that's the bigger tax than income tax. However, Republicans argued that if you're going to design the HOPE credit and the Lifetime Learning credit as an income tax credit, then it should only be available to people who are paying income tax. And 1/3 to half of Americans in any particular year don't owe any income tax. Their income is not high enough to have to pay any. And the final bill was made to be not refundable. In 2001, after President Bush got elected, Congress quickly enacted EGTRA, which was his signature tax cut proposal that he had campaigned on in the election of 2000. But there were two areas that he did not make any proposals on that made it into the bill. One was a set of pension proposals. The other was a set of education tax proposals. These included the college tuition deduction, making the 529 savings plans totally tax-free, making interest on student loans deductible, which Senator Grassley insisted on, and a variety of other provisions promoting higher education.
In 2001, EGTRA created an additional tax benefit for higher education. It was a deduction of the costs of tuition expenses. Deductions are different from credits. If you get a tax credit of $1, you reduce your taxes by $1. Very simple. If you get a deduction of $1, you get to lower your taxable income by $1, which lowers your taxes by the amount of your tax rate. If it's a 35% tax rate, you lower your taxes by 35 cents. That really has two big implications. First of all, deductions again matter only to people who are paying taxes, targeted at the middle class. Second is the benefit is bigger, the bigger is your tax rate. So it actually benefits the more affluent more than it does the less affluent.
For a significant part of our country, tuition deduction was more valuable than the HOPE credit or the Lifetime Learning credit. That's because the HOPE credit and Lifetime Learning credit had relatively low income caps. In other words, if you were a couple and you earned $140,000 a year, you're not eligible for the HOPE credit or Lifetime Learning credit. At the beginning of 2009, the country, of course, was facing the Great Recession. And the first thing that President Obama asked Congress to do was to come up with a stimulus package that would help keep the economy afloat. So in 2009, one of the first bills that passed, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, included a broad range of tax cuts aimed at stimulating the economy.
With the American Opportunity Tax Credit in 2009, there was this decision to invest in families, and not just your typical middle-class family, was really to expand it to lower-income families with the refundability of the American Opportunity Tax Credit.
The American Opportunity Tax Credit differs from the original HOPE credit in that it is broader and more generous and more valuable in virtually every aspect. So the HOPE credit was limited to your first 2 years of undergraduate study. AOTC is 4 years. The HOPE credit had income limits around $50,000, $60,000. The AOTC effectively doubles those. And the size of the credit that someone can claim under AOTC is the maximum is $2,500, which is almost $1,000 more than under the HOPE credit.
The American Opportunity Tax Credit also made the credit refundable up to $1,000.
AOTC is a temporary program, and this is because it was very expensive. So when Congress enacted it, they sunset it. It expired, and Congress and the President agreed to extend it again.
But right now it's currently planning to expire in 2017. It would then revert to the old 2-year tax credit, the HOPE credit.
There is interest in expanding it to allow more students and families to take advantage of it. However, the cost is prohibitive to doing it alone or to doing it without an offset, so there are conversations about ways to be able to pay to do so and how long the extension could be.
The core issues that come up a lot with the value of the tax credits, or the sort of, is this a good policy, is this a bad policy for higher education? The one that comes up a lot is that this is a delayed benefit. So you go, you pay tuition, money leaves your pocket, and then later on when you file your taxes, you go to essentially claim your credit and reclaim the money you spent months in the past. So for people who have very tight budgets, that's a pretty big lag.
I think the number one problem with the American Opportunity Tax Credit, formerly HOPE credit, and the Lifetime credit, and a variety of other tax-related education benefits on deductibility and personal exemptions, and sort of a laundry list of things that the tax code does to assist costs of higher education. If you look at that as a whole, most people just don't understand it. There's a tremendous amount of confusion about what qualifies, who qualifies.
Congress really needs to address the fact that there are too many overlapping tuition benefits.
The future for tax credits will be an interesting one. We've just gone through a period of cuts to our budget that will continue to happen, and those are impacting some basic programs in the education sector. So as we see those continue to happen, but also want to make sure that we're incentivizing and providing opportunities for students and families to pursue higher education, the question will be, what direction should we be going, and where should we be making those investments for those that we want to make sure enter and complete higher education?